Chapter 1. Thorns at the Pitch. The elevator hissed open with an indifferent sigh, revealing April Rivera standing inside it like a bright, trembling flame caught in a storm. She stepped out into the 54th floor of Barrett & Co.'s Manhattan headquarters, its silence absolute, its air conditioner whispering like judgment. Glass, stale, black marble. Not a flower in sight. April adjusted the strap of her canvas portfolio bag, her palms sweaty against the leatherette handle. Her heels clicked too loudly on the polished floor, echoing with every uncertain step. The receptionist looked up from behind an obsidian desk, immaculate as the rest of the office. "Miss Rivera?" Her voice was pleasant, but practiced. "Conference room C. Down the hall, third door on the right." April nodded, swallowed, and smiled, her default defense mechanism. "Thanks." Each step toward that door was a quiet war between courage and the voice in her head that said, "You don't belong here." The hallway walls were blank, not a single photograph or piece of art, just the muted hum of wealth and power, too rich to care about charm. She reached the door and hesitated. Behind it, power players waited. Men in charcoal suits, women in sleek sheaths and pearls, sharp enough to draw blood. Renee Masters, her would be there too, no doubt already seated, already smirking, already calculating April's every heartbeat. April exhaled slowly and opened the door. There were 12 people seated around the obsidian glass conference table, their reflections rippling faintly below them like dark water. At the far end sat Cole Barrett, head of Barrett & Co., his hands folded like stone architecture. His features were carved in shadow and restraint classic American wealth, but haunted, like a mansion with the curtains always drawn. He didn't look up when April entered. "April Rivera," the VP said flatly. 10 minutes. Begin." No handshake. No greeting. No comfort. April felt her cheeks burn, but she pulled out her presentation boards, setting them on the easel beside her. Sketches. Swatches. Photographs of previous corporate lobbies. She'd transformed spaces that had bloomed from concrete shells into living, breathing ecosystems. "I want to talk to you about tension," she began. Her voice was calm, warmer than her heartbeat. "The tension between steel and soil, between what we build and what we bury." A few eyebrows lifted. Renee Masters made a soft, scoffing noise that sounded like a cough covered in perfume. April pressed on. "This isn't about bouquets and vases. It's about language. Plants speak to people. Texture. Temperature. Fragrance. You want to retain your talent, attract creativity, humanize power. This is how you do it." She flipped to her final board, a proposed redesign of the main lobby. Curving green walls. Suspended floral sculptures that mimic neurons and networks. Soft lighting designed to shift subtly with the time of day, paired with seasonal arrangements that told a rotating visual story. "This is more than decoration," she finished softly. "It's conversation." A pause. The room was still. Then, "I suppose we're building a jungle now?" Renee said lightly. Her smile taut as cello strings. "Do we hand out machetes to clients?" Muted chuckles around the table. April kept her face neutral, but the heat rose in her throat like shame. "Thank you, Miss Rivera," the VP murmured. "We'll follow up." April nodded, heart hammering, and gathered her boards. She turned and found herself looking directly into Cole Barrett's eyes. He had lifted his gaze. Finally, his eyes were pale gray. Not blue, not silver, something colder like the sky before a blizzard. They met hers and held. No flicker, no smirk, just an unreadable intensity that pinned her like a specimen. Then he said, "You're hired." The silence in the room was thunderous. "What?" Renee's voice cracked, velvet laced with vinegar. Cole stood. "You'll be embedded here for 6 months," he said, eyes still on April. "You'll report directly to me." But Renee began. Cole cut her off with a glance. It was lethal. April opened her mouth, but no sound came. Not disbelief. Not joy. Just the surreal, breathless vertigo of being pulled from the ocean floor straight into the eye of a hurricane. "Miss Rivera," Cole said calmly, "if you can't handle criticism, You should decline now. April blinked, spine straightening, voice quiet, but sure. I can handle anything. He nodded once. Good. Start Monday. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her surrounded by silence, stares, and the acidic scent of jealousy blooming from Renee's flawless lipstick. April didn't remember the elevator ride down. Her body moved, but her brain was still stuck in that moment. You're hired. Words that should have felt like triumph, but somehow tasted like ice. By the time she stepped onto the street, the buzz of Manhattan smacked her full in the face, honking taxis, chatter from tourists, the smell of roasted peanuts and gasoline, hot wind lifting her curls. The city, like Cole Barrett, never paused to congratulate you. She stopped at the corner and pulled out her phone. Her bank app loaded like a cruel joke. -$287. Shawoo. Her stomach twisted. You did it, she whispered, trying to summon pride. But it came out hollow. Somewhere behind her eyes, her ex's voice resurfaced. You're not business-minded, April. You're decorative. No. Not today. By Monday morning, the corporate headquarters felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had, armed with a contract, a name badge, and 6 months of responsibility. April walked through those glass doors like she'd been invited to redesign the Taj Mahal, but her confidence deflated the moment she saw Cole waiting in the lobby. He wasn't alone. Renee stood beside him, perfectly manicured, a portfolio in her hand still lingering like a thorn that refused to wilt. Miss Rivera, Cole said, without preamble. Follow me. He didn't wait. He just turned and walked, expecting her to keep up. April glanced once at Renee, who offered a poisonous smile and hurried after him. Cole's office was minimalist to the point of aggression. White walls, one black chair, a desk that looked like it had never hosted a single paper. A single photograph sat turned down face down on a shelf. Your working space will be 2 floors below, connected by keycard. You'll have full access from 7 to 7. Weekends included if necessary. April nodded, setting down her satchel carefully, like she didn't want to disturb the air. I want something alive here, he added, motioning vaguely to the room. But not sentimental. Alive, but not sentimental, she repeated softly, more to herself. Yes. She tilted her head, considering. That's not how flowers work. His eyes narrowed slightly. Meaning? Meaning, she said, stepping toward the window that overlooked the skyline. All plants are metaphors. Growth. Grief. Love. Even the ones that thrive on neglect still reach for light. He said nothing, but she caught the way his mouth shifted just a twitch, like he'd swallowed something sharp. The next few hours passed in a blur of logistics and unpacking. April's new design studio, glass-walled, modest, was nothing like her old boutique in Brooklyn, now shuttered thanks to 3 months of unpaid rent, but it had potential. She ran her hand across the granite table, already imagining color schemes, seasonal palettes, textures that would soften the building's sterile heartbeat. She was sketching hydrangea arrangements when a folder was slipped through the glass door. Inside, security access badges, a schedule of weekly executive meetings, and a brief sticky note in perfect, controlled penmanship. Hydrangeas are for apologies. Not confidence. Try again. C. B. She stared at it for a long moment, the corners of her mouth twitching between amusement and irritation. What kind of man knew floral symbolism and wielded it like critique? A beautiful, broken one, whispered something traitorous inside her. Later that evening, April stood in the marble-tiled women's restroom, washing her ink-smudged hands. Her reflection stared back at her, equal parts defiance and exhaustion. The automatic faucet splashed over her wrists as she remembered Cole's voice, precise, clipped, not a syllable wasted. The kind of man who built walls from silence and waited for you to knock. I'm not here for him, she whispered. This is about me. She dried her hands and headed out, only to walk directly into Cole. His scent was subtle, expensive bergamot, cedar, maybe the faintest edge of mint. His tie was undone, collar slightly rumpled, as if even his perfection had edges after dark. I trust your workspace is adequate, he said without looking at her. It's better than I expected, she replied. He finally turned. Their eyes locked. Something tightened in April's chest. "You're efficient," he said, but unfiltered. "Thank you," she replied, not bothering to decide whether it was a compliment or a warning. He hesitated an almost imperceptible beat. "Then, we'll be working closely. I expect discretion." April lifted her chin. "I expect integrity." Something flickered across his face. Not a smile, but not indifference either. "Then we're even." As he walked away, April noticed something strange. He passed by the reception desk but paused just briefly at the vase of lilies someone had placed there. His fingers hovered over the bloom. For a breath, his hand trembled. Then he walked on. And April knew deep in the soil of her gut that Cole Barrett wasn't just sterile steel. There were roots in him, buried, twisting, and she was going to find them. April arrived at 6:45 a.m., well before the rest of the building's hum came alive. The corporate lobby was a cathedral of austerity glass, iron, and polished stone that reflected no warmth. The floral arrangements from last week, cold and precise, had been composed by someone with a heavy hand and no poetry. Not dead, not alive, just existing, like corporate decor often did. April wheeled in her cart of blooms as if she were storming a palace. Today's palette: soft coral, blush, and creamy whites, offset with dark purple foliage and slender sprays of gold. Tipped eucalyptus. She'd chosen camellias as the anchor. Elegant, controlled, but delicate if bruised. Like someone she knew, she glanced toward the upper floors. Cole Barrett would not be in yet. Probably. It took her nearly 3 hours to complete the transformation. The marble centerpiece pedestal, once holding a sterile bouquet of forced orchids, now cradled a floral sculpture that mimicked a bursting seed pod, echoing with gentle chaos and renewal. April worked in silence, humming under her breath, the scent of garden roses and moss unfurling into the cold air like whispered rebellion. When she stepped back, sweat gathering under her blouse, she finally smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because it breathed. The elevator chimed behind her. She froze, pulse hiccuping. He stepped out slowly. Not yet today. A charcoal jacket over a graphite t-shirt, his hair still damp from a recent shower. His gaze swept the lobby like a laser. And then it stopped. On the camellias, he stood utterly still. April didn't move. She watched him from her position across the lobby, heart suspended somewhere in her throat. Cole approached the display with precise, measured steps. One hand rose not quite touching, just hovering above a single pale pink camellia. The tension in his body shifted, infinitesimally. His chest barely moved. "Do sentimental?" April asked quietly. He turned, not startled, just aware of her. His eyes found hers. "No," he said. "Just unexpected. I thought it might be time to let the building feel something." His lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. "I didn't authorize this arrangement." "I know. I did it anyway." He looked at her, fully now. "Most people don't defy me on day 3. She shrugged. "Most people don't hire me." He walked past her, and she followed, their footsteps echoing with the kind of rhythm that hadn't yet settled into comfort or danger. Somewhere in between. He led her to a side hallway she hadn't yet explored, plain, shadowed, ending in a wall of frosted glass doors. He scanned his keycard and held one open. April blinked. The space was cavernous, cold, and bare except for floor-to-ceiling windows and a long silver table running the length of the room. Light flooded in, but the air was stiff, unlived. "This is the executive strategy suite," he said. "Make it livable." She stepped inside slowly. "Livable? For strategy?" He turned to face her, his jaw flexed slightly. "Strategy requires oxygen. And you trust me to create that? I trust you to make it less miserable." She took a breath, already imagining it lavender sprigs woven into angular shapes, potted lemon-scented myrtle along the window, maybe even a living wall of green ivy beneath the presentation screen. He started to leave. "Mr. Barrett?" He paused. "I meant what I said the other day. she said. About flowers being language. What's your language? He didn't turn, just answered, quietly. Silence. Then he left. Later that afternoon, April searched for camellias in her design books. There were dozens of meanings: perfection, admiration, longing. But it was one note that caught her attention. In Victorian floriography, a pink camellia means, I long for you. Her fingers lingered on the page. She closed the book slowly and began designing the strategy suite. Not with longing, but with oxygen. The strategy suite looked like it had been designed by a robot with an allergy to color. Every surface was cold, every edge precise. Yet the window's floor-to-ceiling glass walls framing the skyline like a private cinema offered her the one luxury Cole Barrett could never sterilize: light. April stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, sketchbook tucked into her chest like a diary she didn't want read. She turned slowly, breathing it all in, letting ideas take root like wildflowers in concrete cracks. Then she reached for her pencil. By Thursday, the space had started to shift. Not drastically. Cole hated change when it felt like confession. But subtly, purposefully. 2 trailing vines of ficus repens climbed opposite corners of the room, mimicking upward motion aspiration disguised as nature. Pale blue hydrangeas in textured clay pots sat at intervals along the walls, giving bursts of softness that made the glass seem less severe. And in the far corner, near the west-facing window, she planted a single lemon tree. Small, still fragile, but defiantly alive. She was adjusting the placement of a wooden diffuser amber oil, grounding and warm when she sensed him. Cole stood in the doorway, silent, as always, watching. You moved fast, he said, stepping in. His tone was neutral. His eyes were not. Nature doesn't wait, she replied, not turning. He moved further into the room, his gaze skating along the walls, the shadows now less stark. He stopped at the lemon tree. This is a risk. So is everything worth feeling. He looked at her sharply, but there was no anger in it, only discomfort. The kind that prickled under the skin when you weren't used to warmth. You've changed the light in here, he murmured. I haven't touched the bulbs, she said gently. The plants absorb glare. Diffuse it. He reached out, his fingertips brushing a eucalyptus stem. April watched the movement closely. It was the second time he'd touched a plant this week. Something in her chest bloomed at the realization. You used to live in Brooklyn, he said suddenly, eyes still on the plant. Prospect Heights. Your old boutique, what was it called? Her heart thudded. Wild Revisions. You closed it last winter. It wasn't a question. How do you know that? His gaze finally lifted. I do my research. You stalk your florists? I vet my collaborators. April swallowed hard. You didn't ask about my finances. I didn't need to. Your desperation was obvious in the pitch. He paused. But so was your conviction. The words struck her like a slap and an embrace at the same time. He walked toward the far wall, where she'd arranged a minimal installation of wire and birch branches strung with air plants. It looked like a constellation. Or a map. What does this say? He asked. She stepped closer. That your company is built on growth that doesn't need roots. But it still craves structure. Like air plants. They thrive on trust and intention. Not soil. He didn't answer. But the silence that followed felt different. Not cold. Just considering. That night, April worked late. The building emptied. Even security guards seemed to vanish. She dimmed the lights in the suite and sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by her sketchbook, an unfinished centerpiece, and a thermos of chamomile tea she'd forgotten to drink. The lemon tree cast a soft shadow against the window. The scent of eucalyptus and honeywood curled around her like a lullaby. She didn't hear the door open, only sensed him again. Cole stood in the semi-darkness, loosened tie in hand, something unreadable in his face. You work after hours, he said softly. I breathe better when the building's asleep. He walked toward her slowly, stopping just outside the edge of her circle of tools and trimmings. Do you always talk in metaphors? Only when I'm trying not to feel exposed. He sat, just like that, on the floor beside her, His legs folded, his presence silent but overwhelming. April didn't move. Neither did he. The silence stretched between them, not heavy, not hostile. Just waiting. "What does a camellia mean?" he asked, eyes not on her, but on the lemon tree. "Which color?" "Pink." She hesitated. "Admiration. Longing. Gratitude." Stillness. Then, "My mother had a garden once. In Westchester. Camellias near the back. I haven't thought about them in decades." April's heart beat slowly, painfully. What happened to it? "She died. My father had the yard ripped out and paved over. A bitter exhale. Said flowers were a waste of time." "And you believed him?" "I was 6. They sat in silence, the city lights flickering through the glass like distant fireflies. April picked up a bloom from her basket and held it out. A pink camellia. He didn't take it. But he looked at it for a long time. And for the first time since she met him, his voice cracked. "She called me Bud. Said I bloomed late." April blinked away the sudden sting behind her eyes. "You're still blooming," she whispered. When he finally took the flower, he did it like it was glass. And for that moment, fragile and fleeting, he didn't feel like her boss. He felt like a boy who had been unloved for too long. And she was soil. Chapter 3. The Emergency Bloom. The call came at 10:12 p.m. April was curled up on her apartment's worn velvet couch in Harlem, sketchbook in her lap, chamomile mug growing cold on the floor. She nearly didn't answer. Only a handful of people had her number, and most of them were either blocked or blood-related. But when she saw the caller ID Barrett & Co., HQ, her breath hitched. She picked up. "Miss Rivera," said a deep voice, male, clipped, but not Cole. "You're needed at the office. Now." A pause. "Is this a joke?" "No, ma'am." "Mr. Barrett requests your immediate presence. There's been an error with the floral arrangements in the executive dining suite. He's expecting investors at 7 a.m. April stood. "Why is this my problem at 10 o'clock at night?" "Because Miss Hend, Master's design has triggered allergic reactions in 2 staff members," the man said, "and she's no longer contracted with the company." "You are." "Of course." "Renee." April bit back a curse. She'd been gone from the building for 2 days, and the woman still managed to sabotage her by scent. "Tell Mr. Barrett I'll be there in 20. The elevator doors opened to a building darker than she'd ever seen it. No security guards. No employees. Just her, a key card, and the low, rhythmic thrum of electricity somewhere in the bones of the tower. The dining suite was on the 49th floor, sleek, modern, and cavernous. The moment she entered, she knew the damage. Lilies. Fragrant, ostentatious, white as theater makeup, and completely inappropriate for a breakfast investor meeting. Herskeenpregel. The arrangement was stunning, yes, but suffocating, pompous. Too many lilies, too much perfume. No air. No humility. It reeked of Renee. She dropped her bag and began dismantling it immediately, working in her jeans and a loose white tee, hair twisted into a messy bun. The silence in the room was total except for the snip of shears and the quiet breath of her concentration. She didn't hear him enter. Most people wouldn't come. April startled, nearly slicing a hydrangea stem at the wrong angle. Cole stood just inside the doorway, sleeves rolled to the elbow, jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes were dark in the low light. There was something about him at night less composed, less restrained, or perhaps just less guarded. She blinked. "You called me here?" He stepped forward, his voice soft. "I didn't trust anyone else." April exhaled, slowly placing a tulip into the crystal vase she'd just washed. "You didn't call to supervise, did you?" "No." "Then why are you still here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took off his jacket, folded it neatly over the back of a chair, and stepped beside her. "What are you using?" "Peonies. Tulips. Clematis. Touches of feverfew. Nothing too strong. Friendly but still smart." He bent slightly, touching a bloom with careful fingers. This one's bleeding. She followed his gaze. Apital, torn. She hadn't noticed. Good catch. He looked at her. You're tired. She shrugged. So are you. Cole reached into the basket beside her and gently removed another peony, handing it to her. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, barely a touch, but it sent a jolt through her spine. She didn't pull away. Tell me, he said, quieter now, what makes a flower arrangement good? April paused, watching him watch the petals. Emotion, she said. Balance. Respect for the bloom's purpose. You don't force a tulip to be a rose. His eyes flickered. And people? She turned back to the arrangement. Same rules apply. They worked in tandem for a while. Quiet. Focused. The silence between them wasn't sharp like it used to be. It was something softer now, like the hush before music begins. At one point, Cole rolled up his sleeves higher, revealing a faded scar just above his right elbow. A thin, pale line. Childhood accident? A belt? A bottle? She didn't ask. But her eyes lingered. You're not what I expected, she said, carefully inserting a clematis vine through the peonies. Neither are you. A pause. I thought you'd be colder, she added. I am. No, she said. You're not. At 103A, M. The arrangement was complete. It was wild, organic, graceful, a bloom of joy in a room of suits and power. April stepped back, wiped her hands on her jeans, and stared at it. I like it, she whispered. Cole stood beside her. It feels honest. They both looked at the flowers. Then, at the same time, turned to look at each other. His face was close, closer than it should be. April could see the hint of freckles under his eyes, the way his breath moved more from his chest now than his lungs. Thank you, he said. She barely nodded. And then slowly, he reached for her hand. Not to hold it. Not quite. Just to rest his palm against the back of it, as if testing something fragile. It was the softest touch he'd ever felt. And somehow it broke something open. April didn't breathe. His hand stayed there, just the weight of it. The warmth of his palm on the back of hers, like an ember cupped between silence and intention. It wasn't a romantic gesture. Not overtly. It was something rarer. Trust before permission. Fragile. Temporary. But real. Cole withdrew slowly, gaze never leaving hers. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain, but he didn't need to. The distance between them now felt different. Not like a wall, more like a bridge half built, waiting to be crossed from both sides. I should go, April said quietly. He nodded once, the movement slow, reluctant. You've done enough for tonight. She gathered her things, stuffing stems and scraps back into her basket. The silence lingered, companionable now. She didn't know when that had changed. Maybe in the moment his hand met hers. Maybe before. Cole followed her to the elevator, his steps echoing softly beside hers. When the doors slid open, she turned to him. You didn't have to stay. I know. But you did. He studied her for a long moment. Then, very softly, like the echo of a memory, he said, Camellias used to bloom outside my bedroom window. The scent would wake me up before school. April's heart caught. I didn't know they had a scent. They don't. Not really. I just thought they did. Silence. Then the elevator doors closed between them. By morning, the dining suite was a symphony of praise. Investors lingered beside the centerpiece. One commented that it felt like a sunrise in a room full of wolves. April, blurry-eyed but smiling, returned to her studio on the 52nd floor to find a sealed white envelope on her drafting table. Inside, a single camellia petal, dried, and a note. One line, handwritten in that same stark architectural script. Some things only bloom at night. C. B. She ran her finger over the words like she was tracing a wound. That afternoon, the media team began setting up for a promotional video shoot in the building lobby. Cole's assistant had requested updated florals to be camera-ready by 3 o'clock p.m. April was rebuilding the arrangement from the other day when a familiar voice floated in behind her like a cold perfume. Well, well. The charity hire is still blooming. April turned to see Renee Masters, hair glossy, lips lacquered, heels too loud on the marble, still pretending to be relevant. April said without turning, "I came to return some inventory." Renee glanced down at the basket of fresh peonies. "You really are overcompensating with those, aren't you?" April smiled tightly. "They're known to wilt around poison." Renee's eyes narrowed, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she walked over to the centerpiece, fingers grazing the edge of one white tulip. "You know, Cole only keeps things around if they're useful. Or beautiful. If you're not both, you're replaceable." April didn't flinch. "I'm not a vase, Renee." "No," Renee said sweetly. "You're the flower. And we both know how short-lived those are." Then she turned and walked away, her heels slicing the air like knives. Hours later, April sat in her studio, the windows dimmed against the setting sun. Her fingers idled along the edge of her sketch pad, drawing loops and petals without focus. She shouldn't let Renee get to her. But the truth echoed deeper than the insult. She was vulnerable. Every petal she arranged, every scent she unleashed into these corporate bones, it all came from a place inside her she didn't always trust. The part that still grieved a boutique she couldn't save, a man who left her with debt and empty apologies, a heart that hadn't bloomed in years. And yet, Cole had touched her hand like it mattered. He had stayed. And that meant something, even if she didn't know what yet. That night, just before she turned out the lights, April walked back to the lemon tree in the strategy suite. She bent beside it, brushing away a few fallen leaves, and found something small nestled in the soil. A tiny, gray ceramic watering bell, unmistakably antique, and placed with care. She smiled, then whispered into the room, "Good night, bud." Chapter 4. Graves and Ghosts. April wasn't supposed to be at the cemetery. She hadn't planned. It hadn't even known where Cole's mother was buried. But after her conversation with Evelyn, the CFO's assistant, who casually mentioned how no one had tended Alice Barrett's grave since 2003, April found herself on a subway to the Bronx, holding a bundle of white hellebores, soft pink chrysanthemums, and a single pale camellia in her lap like a confession. It was cold for April. Windy. The kind of spring chill that clung to your skin and whispered winter's ghost wasn't gone yet. She walked through the crooked rows of headstones, guided only by a vague description and instinct. Then she found it. Alice Faye Barrett. 1963. 1995. Beloved daughter. Cherished mother. That was all. No flowers. No offerings. The stone was clean but lonely. The grass around it uneven, as though time had simply stopped here. April knelt, brushing her fingers over the engraving. She imagined Cole, small and silent, standing here with that same carved expression he wore in the boardroom. She wondered if he'd cried, if anyone had held his hand. She pulled out her tools. The arrangement was delicate, not grand or showy, just truthful. She didn't bring roses. Alice didn't strike her as a rose woman. April chose bell-shaped hellebores, flowers of quiet resilience. The chrysanthemums were for remembrance, and the camellia, that was for the boy left behind. She placed it last, carefully nestling it in the center. Then, for a long moment, she sat in the cold grass, her hands in her lap, and let silence wrap around her like moss. Back at headquarters, she didn't say anything. Didn't tell Cole. Didn't even know if he'd notice. But the next morning, when she entered her studio, there was a folded note on her chair. It smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. Some flowers shouldn't be buried alone. Thank you. C. There was no signature, but he'd written her name on the outside. April. In ink. Slanted, masculine handwriting. Not a printed memo or typed line of critique, just her name. She pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. But kindness from Cole came in flickers, unpredictable and unpromised. That same afternoon, he was back to his armored self. Distant, unreadable, During a client walkthrough of the reimagined strategy suite, he barely acknowledged her presence. Introduced her as consultant. Didn't meet her eyes once. She kept her face composed, let the moment slide off like rain from waxed leaves. But inside she felt it, the small shiver of hurt, the sting of hoping too much. After the meeting, she caught him in the hallway. Was it necessary to act like I was invisible? He didn't stop walking. Professionalism, he said. You know, most people say thank you when someone revives a family grave. He paused at that, just for a breath, then said, I didn't ask you to go. Her voice cracked. No, you didn't. But you felt something, Cole. I saw it. That matters. He turned then, fully, his eyes storm-colored and quiet. Feeling something, he said softly, isn't the same as being allowed to feel it. And then he walked away, leaving her standing in the echo of his grief. That evening, April stayed late, rearranging the reception florals, not because they needed it, because she needed it. Because grief wasn't tidy. Because love, real love, often bloomed in the wrong season. Because men like Cole Barrett weren't raised to water anything that couldn't survive neglect. She clipped a new camellia stem, ran her thumb across the petal's edge, and whispered, You're allowed, Cole. Even if no one ever told you. By Friday, Cole was ice again. Meetings became short. Eye contact became scarce. His tone, the sharp, architectural kind April once admired for its precision, now landed like frostbite. But it wasn't coldness. Not really. It was retreat. And April knew it. Because the moment someone touched the edges of Cole's grief, he folded inward like a night-blooming flower robbed of its moonlight. That afternoon, she entered the elevator at the same time he did. A silent ride. Just them, inches apart, but separated by miles of unsaid. He stood still, hands clasped behind his back, body straight as a soldier's. She studied the reflection of his face in the mirrored wall. Tenseyo. Distant gaz. But his thumb pressed into the heel of his palm, rubbing in a small rhythmic motion. Self-soothing. A nervous tick. The doors opened. He stepped out without a word. But she followed. Cole. It was the first time she said his name aloud. He stopped, not turning. April took a breath. You don't have to punish me for caring. Slowly, he turned. His expression was unreadable except for his eyes. They burned with something heavy. You don't understand, he said. Then explain it. A pose. The kind that carries entire histories inside it. My father thinks emotions are liabilities, Cole said finally, his voice low and tight. He built a world where love was a transaction, where grief was weakness, where sentiment got people hurt. April didn't interrupt. She let the silence stretch, softening it with her presence. I was 8, he continued. When my mother died, I came home from school, and the garden was gone. All of it. He'd had it torn up while I was at recess. April's breath caught. Cole glanced away, jaw flexing. He said it was time I learned what couldn't be controlled, shouldn't be kept. She stepped closer. And you believed him? No. His eyes met hers. But I learned not to need anything. Not really. April's voice was barely a whisper. That's not the same thing. No, he said. It's safer. They stood there, the fluorescent light humming above them, the world still moving outside those glass walls. April took another step forward. Why did you keep the grave hidden? His voice cracked the tiniest bit. Because I failed her. You were a child. I didn't scream, he said. I didn't fight back. I watched the garden go. I just let it happen. April's heart broke open. That wasn't failure, Cole. That was survival. His chest rose, fell, then again, slower, a pause. And then, as if the words were being pulled from him by force, you made it beautiful again. I didn't do it for you. That surprised him. She smiled gently. I did it for her. For the part of her that still lives in you. The part you're too afraid to let bloom. He blinked. April reached into her pocket and handed him something small. A laminated card. He unfolded it slowly. It was a pressed camellia, pink, preserved between two layers of protective film, delicate veins visible like a memory mapped in petal. He held it like it was breakable, because maybe he was. That night, April walked home beneath pale Manhattan stars, her body vibrating with unshed emotion. The streets buzzed around her horns, distant sirens, laughter from rooftop bars, but inside, she felt quiet. Not hollow, just still. When she reached her apartment, her voicemail blinked. One new message. She played it on speaker as she peeled off her jacket. Damien. Her ex's voice slid through the air like oil on water. Hey, April. I saw the company's press photos this morning. That floral piece. Yours, right? You always had the touch. Listen, I've been thinking. Let's talk. I know things ended rough, but I've got something that might help you out. Business-wise. Money-wise. Give me a call. She stared at the wall for a long moment, then deleted the message, and sat down beside her camellia, blooming stubbornly in a mason jar by the window. Chapter 5. An Unwelcome Rescue. April's week began with the first peony bloom in the rooftop greenhouse. She had found the tiny, neglected garden 2 weeks ago, 4 stories above Barrett & Co.'s main tower, tucked behind a forgotten emergency exit door that stuck unless you hip-checked it just right. The space was overgrown, dusty, and unloved, an echo of a half-started corporate wellness program, but the light was perfect, and the silence was a kind of sanctuary. She'd been sneaking up during her breaks, tending it back to life, plant by plant. She hadn't told anyone, especially not Cole. This bloom, blushing and unapologetic, was hers alone. She gently cupped it in her palm, smiling. You made it. The moment lasted until her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Froze. Damien. Calling. Again. They met at a cafe in the West Village, only because he insisted it would be good press if someone caught them together. That phrase alone made April want to pour her iced matcha down his starched collar. Damien Carter hadn't changed. Not really. Still tailored. Still tan in that curated, Manhattan-gent elitist way. And still talking like every sentence was a pitch. I've seen the buzz, he said, sliding into the booth like he owned it. Your work at Barrett & Co. Gorgeous. Finally found a sandbox that pays for your daydreams, huh? April sipped her drink without answering. Her fingers stayed curled around her glass like it might keep her steady. He leaned in, lowering his voice. Look, I know you hate me fair, but I've got this pop-up project in the Hamptons. Luxury real estate meets immersive eco-design. Think flowers, think wellness, think money. I want you on it. She blinked. You want to hire me? Partner with you. He flashed that old smile, bright and insincere. We could erase all that debt you racked up after the shop closed. Get you back on top. You deserve that. April stared at him, then laughed. Soft, slow, dangerous. You mean erase your guilt? She said. You left me with empty accounts, a lease I couldn't break, and an IRS letter with my name on it. He had the audacity to look wounded. I wasn't ready for commitment. You weren't ready for decency. Silence stretched across the table. Then, more softly, I'm not that guy anymore. April tilted her head. No, you're a smarter version of that guy. He leaned back, clearly irritated now. Look, I'm offering you a lifeline. You're still just renting space in a company that doesn't care if you stay or go. April's eyes narrowed. He cares. The words were out before she could stop them. Damien's eyebrows lifted. Oh, he said. Is that what this is? You and Cole Barrett? Didn't know flowers came with benefits. April's face flushed, fury blooming hot under her skin. She stood slowly, hands steady, voice low and sharp. Don't confuse what we had with what I have now. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. You'll come back. They always do. No, she said, picking up her bag, they don't. She didn't go back to the office right away. Instead, she walked through Soho, past the Flower District, down into the buzz and heartbeat of Lower Manhattan. letting the city breathe for her when she couldn't. Damien had always known how to find her soft spots, her vulnerabilities, but this time his offer didn't tempt her, not because she wasn't afraid, but because for the first time in months she had built something real, roots stretching, even if the soil was still fragile. And Cole Barrett, he wasn't a lifeline, but he might be something else, something slower, deeper, more dangereux. When she returned to Barrett & Co. that evening, it was nearly sunset. She entered through the rooftop garden, checking on the peony, now fully open. Its petals caught the golden light like silk. She turned to head down, and stopped. Cole was standing at the threshold, his frame silhouetted by the amber glow, one hand on the doorframe, a folder in his other hand. His tie was loosened, his hair windblown, and he looked tired, exposed. He said nothing at first, just studied her. His gaze fell to the flower in her hand. "You're not on the clock," he murmured. "I'm not a clock-in kind of girl." I noticed. April stepped forward. "I had a meeting. With someone who hurt you." Her breath caught. "How do you know that?" Cole held up the folder in his hand, shaking it lightly. "He left a proposal on my desk this afternoon. Named you as co-designer." Her stomach dropped. Of course Damien would try to go over her head. She steadied her voice. I turned him down. Cole's gaze locked onto hers. "Why?" April looked at him for a long moment. "Because I don't need rescuing from something I survived." He didn't move, didn't speak, but something in his chest seemed to loosen. He stepped toward her, slow and careful, and said, "Neither do I." Cole didn't say anything else. He just stood there, the folder forgotten at his side, the rooftop wind ruffling his shirt at the collar. April could smell him clean, like cedar and citrus, tinged now with the faintest trace of fatigue, not exhaustion, something heavier, a weariness of the soul. She stepped closer, one breath, then another, until they stood just a foot apart, caught in that strange liminal space where something either bloomed or withered. "I don't want you thinking I'm fragile," she said softly. His eyes flicked up. "I don't. But you're treating me like glass." He didn't deny it. April looked down at the peony in her hand. Its petals curled at the edges now, like a sigh. "Do you know what this flower means?" "Tell me." "Honor, but also shame, regret, apology, the whole tangle. Why give it to yourself?" "I didn't." She met his gaze. "I brought it up here because it survived frost, neglect, and 3 inches of mold, and still bloomed. That's not shame." Cole was quiet. Then, unexpectedly, he reached for her hand. Not gently, not urgently, just firmly, his skin cool against hers, like riverstone. "You're not fragile," he said. "You terrify me." April blinked. "Why?" "Because you make everything feel like it could break," he whispered. "And I was taught that broken things have no place in boardrooms." "Then maybe the boardroom needs breaking," she said. The smallest smile ghosted across his lips, but it faded quickly, replaced by something more difficult, something close to confession. "My father saw the proposal. April Stille. He knows I've let you into restricted zones, graves, rooftops, internal meetings." Cole's voice dropped. "He asked me if I was letting you contaminate the company's culture." Her stomach twisted. "What did you say?" "That the culture was already dying." A beat. He looked away. "He threatened to report you to the board as a breach of internal process. Said I was jeopardizing the company for personal indulgences." "Oh." April's throat tightened. "And are you?" she asked. He looked at her, sharply. Then, quietly, "I haven't decided." She stepped back not far, just enough for air. "I'm not your indulgence, Cole. I know. I'm not your project either. I know that too." She looked at him a long time, letting the silence stretch taut between them. Then she said, "You need to decide." "Because I already have." His eyes sharpened. "What does that mean?" April's voice didn't waver. "It means I'm not interested in halfway. Not in love. Not in loyalty. not in risk. He flinched visibly, not at her tone. At her word, love. She didn't take it back. Let him sit with it. Let it land. She left before he could say anything else. Walked down the metal stairs into the building like every step meant something. Like the peony in her hand was a flag and not a flower. She didn't look back. But if she had, she would have seen him standing exactly where she'd left him, watching the place where she used to be, fingers curled, lips parted, chest rising in a rhythm. Too human for a man who lived his life in numbers and contracts. The next day, Cole didn't show up to the office. No calls. No texts. No explanations. By noon, whispers were circling. Something about a board meeting being moved. Something about Barrett Sr. demanding compliance audits. By 2 p.m., April's badge no longer gave her access to the 52nd floor. By 3 p.m., a single box was waiting for her in her studio, filled with her sketchbooks, pens, and 3 camellia petals pressed inside a closed notebook. No noche. No signature. Just absence. Like a room full of flowers suddenly stripped bare. Chapter 6. The Cut. The hallway outside April's studio was too quiet. Too final. The kind of quiet that follows a slammed door or a drawn blade. When she tapped her keycard again, hope clinging to her fingertips, the scanner beeped red. Denied. She stared at it. Heart slowing into disbelief. She tried again. Beep. Red. Denied. The sterile glass of the 52nd floor stared back at her, her reflection warped, uninvited. Behind it, her plants still bloomed. The lemon tree she'd nursed into fragile resilience leaned toward the light, unaware its gardener had been locked out. Her pulse rose. Her throat tightened. Then footsteps. She turned. It was him. Cole. Dressed in his usual sleek armor, navy suit, black shirt, no tie. But his expression was off. Hardened. Too smooth. Like marble over a crack in the wall. What's going on? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He didn't meet her eyes. Security access has been modified. All vendor credentials are under audit. Vendor? She echoed. Cold blossomed in her chest. I'm not a vendor, Cole. I was your partner on this redesign. I spent 6 months breathing life into this mausoleum, and now I'm suddenly locked out? He inhaled deeply. The board received complaints about preferential treatment. Conflict of interest. April felt her body go still. From who? He didn't answer. Was it Renee? She pressed. Your father? Still nothing. Just that terrible, empty pause. And then, with excruciating calm, it's best you step away until this is resolved. April stared at him, disoriented. You're telling me this? He nodded. Once. As if that were mercy. Her mouth opened, then shut. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. When I decorated your mother's grave, you said nothing. When I stayed overnight to save your investor pitch, you stayed. When I let you in, her voice cracked, you held my hand. Still, he didn't move. Didn't blink. As if he were carved from something older than sorrow. Was that a lie too? No, he said. But this is necessary. Necessary for who? Her voice rose. Your father's approval? Your shareholders? For you, he said, and finally met her eyes. It shattered her. Because you deserve better than the chaos my name brings. She laughed, bitter and raw. So you're pushing me away to protect me? Really? His silence was confirmation. You coward, she whispered. She didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked away before he could see her tears. She didn't go home. Instead, she walked the city for hours, numb fingers tracing the sketchbook spine in her coat pocket, feet blistering in shoes meant for power, not pain. By nightfall, she found herself back in Brooklyn, in front of a dusty storefront with boarded windows and ivy climbing where signs used to hang. Wild revisions, the flower shop she'd lost to debt and betrayal. She pressed her hand against the glass. It smelled like dust and ghosts. But also, beginnings. The next morning, April opened her email and saw an unexpected transfer. Arsha Wu. Ling. From Barrett Holdings, LLC. Subject line: Final payment. No message. No explanation. Just money. Her heart sank. Not with relief. With grief. It was too clean. Tuniat. And utterly devoid of love. She spent the rest of the weekend building something anyway. A pop-up in an abandoned cafe, 2 blocks from the old shop. She hung dried roses in the window and handwritten signs on the glass. Floral truths. Real blooms. No pretense. She painted petals by candlelight. She arranged camellias with trembling hands and told herself, "I'm not a man's indulgence." But every flower she touched remembered his name. Monday morning came gray and indifferent, the kind of sky that forgets the sun exists. Manhattan blurred in mist and motion, the city's rhythm drumming forward without noticing who had fallen out of step. April unlocked the pop-up space. She now called her own, though space was generous. A cracked teal floor, dusty windows, the smell of old espresso and forgotten pastries still clung to the air. But it had light, and she had hands. She set out bunches of wax flowers and eucalyptus, taped handwritten labels on milk bottles. Courage. Clarity. Goodbye. By 10 a.m., strangers started to wander in. By noon, someone posted a photo online. Unexpected flower poetry in Brooklyn. Go. By sunset, she'd sold out of everything but bitter orange branches and honesty plants. It wasn't a future yet, but it wasn't Cole Barrett either. And that mattered. That same afternoon, April received a visitor. She was retying a display when she heard the bell above the door. She looked up expecting a customer, a curious passerby, maybe even a friend from her floral guild. But it was Renee. Immaculate. Ice-pink lipstick, nails sharp enough to slice ribbon, holding a branded coffee cup like a trophy. April didn't flinch. She simply crossed her arms and said, "Did you get lost on your way to the Botox boutique?" Renee smiled, slow and feline. "Just thought I'd see how our little florist was doing without her safety net. I wasn't aware I ever needed one." "Of course you were." Renee's tone dipped into syrupy faux pity. "Sweetheart, Cole doesn't let anyone in unless he plans to cut them out. That's his game. You were just this quarter's experiment." April's face remained still, but her heart beat thunder in her ears. "He fought for me," she said. "He stayed late. He listened. He felt. Renee tilted her head. And yet you're here, covered in pollen and bruised ego, while he sits 10 stories above the world pretending you never happened." A pause. April stepped forward, eyes locked on Renee's. "You know the difference between you and me?" she said, voice low but clear. "I bloom in dirt. You rot in glass." Renee's jaw twitched. April smiled. "Now, unless you're here to order a bouquet for the next woman you plan to undermine, I suggest you leave." Renee opened her mouth, then thought better of it. She turned on her heels and swept out, heels clicking like teeth against tile. Later that night, April sat alone on the floor of the shop, a half glass of wine in one hand and a peeled blood orange in the other. The fruit stained her fingers scarlet. She liked the mess of it, the truth of it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then she saw the preview text. "They're trying to push him out." Her fingers froze. She opened the message. "Richard Barrett is engineering a shareholder coup. Cole's being isolated. Removed. Quietly. Thought you should know. E. Evelyn, the CFO's assistant." April's stomach dropped. So that's why he pushed her away. Not just fear, not shame. Stotage. He was protecting her by disappearing himself, cutting ties so she couldn't be used against him. She set the phone down and stared at the darkened ceiling. Something cold and electric moved in her chest, not grief. Resolve. She rose slowly, crossed the room, and stood before the large mirror she'd propped against the far wall. In the reflection, she saw a woman with tangled hair, orange-stained hands, and eyes full of fire. "You left me to save me," she whispered. And then, softer, "Now I'll come back to save you." Chapter Sept. Renee's Poison Petals. The lobby of Barrett & Co. smelled like antiseptic and artificial lilies. April could tell even before she stepped inside. There was a sterility to the air floral. Yes, but hollow, designed for appearances, not emotion. Like everything Renee touched. The receptionist looked up and blinked. "Miss Rivera, I don't think you're cleared." "I'm not here to go upstairs," April said. She gave her a small, pointed smile. "Just returning something." She walked slowly toward the central display, the one she'd curated for months with intention and breath, now overtaken by the unmistakable signature of Renee Masters: tight white lilies, structured hydrangeas, boxwood hedges shaped into grotesque perfection. It was a funeral arrangement pretending to be confidence. April stood there for a moment, head tilted, like she was studying a painting. Then she reached into her tote and gently placed a single coral peony at the base of the arrangement. Just one. Soft, out of place, and utterly disruptive. A whisper in a chorus of screams. Back outside, April called Evelyn from a payphone because her number had mysteriously been removed from the company directory. "It's worse than I thought," Evelyn said in a rush. "Richard's calling emergency board meetings. He's blaming Cole for emotional bias, overspending on interior initiatives, even hinting at misappropriation." April's heart stuttered. But he didn't. No, but he's too silent to defend himself. He's letting the storm come. "He's protecting me," she said softly. "Or punishing himself. You know how he is." April ran her hand over her face. "Can I get into the next board meeting?" There was a pause. "That's unlikely. I just need 5 minutes. On record." Evelyn hesitated. "What are you planning?" April looked down at the coral peony in her hand, the last one from her Brooklyn pop-up window. "Something loud," she whispered, "and impossible to ignore." That night, April reopened her old Instagram account. Wild revisions. It had sat dormant for nearly a year. Her last post, a farewell to the shop. A photo of her bloodied fingers pruning thorns from a Valentine's shipment, 3 days before Damien emptied her account. She uploaded a photo of the peony she left in the Barrett & Co. Lobby. Caption: "Real flowers brise. Fake ones don't. Guess which one tells the truth?" Then she tagged the company. Then she waited. By morning, it had gone viral. First within floral design circles, then in corporate aesthetics blogs, then in a half-dozen think pieces about the sterile empire of masculine interiors. Hashtags exploded. Petal revolt. Barrett blooms. The flower that fought back. But what broke everything wide open was what happened at 9:12 a.m. when a junior copywriter from Barrett & Co. posted anonymously, "When April Rivera was here, the building felt like it wanted us here too." Another followed. "The moment she left, we started calling the new lobby the morgue." Oh. Then another. "The flowers told the truth. The suits are just scared of it." April watched it unfold from her borrowed studio space in Brooklyn, heart pounding, tea untouched. She knew Renee would be fuming. She knew Richard would be sharpening his knives. But she also knew something else. Cole was watching. And maybe, just maybe, remembering what it felt like to breathe. By Thursday, the Barrett & Co. lobby was more famous than the company's quarterly earnings report. April's single coral peony, now wilted but defiantly present, was photographed from every angle. Articles called it a symbol of corporate rebellion. The petal heard round the tower, and the quietest resignation letter that became a battle cry. The building's executives began receiving anonymous flower deliveries from creative departments and junior staff bouquets, labeled with phrases like, "In honor of honesty and truth can't be trimmed." And Renee? She was spiraling. She issued a company-wide memo insisting on floral uniformity protocols and scheduled a full rebranding of the lobby with metallic sculpture and scentless silk installations. Within 24 hours, a Barrett staffer leaked it to the press. The headline: "The War on Emotion. Barrett & Co. As corporate sanitization backfires." April didn't gloat. She didn't post another thing. She didn't need to. She waited, planted, watered, and by Friday morning, she was invited to speak, not by the board, But by Cole, a hand-delivered envelope arrived at her Brooklyn studio, sealed with real wax. Inside, tomorrow, 8:30 a.m., boardroom A. 5 minutes. Wear red. C. B. She held the note in her hand for a long time, staring at the final flourish of his initials. It was the first time in weeks he'd reached out directly. It wasn't an apology. It was an invitation. To fight. Saturday arrived, sharp and blue-skied. April stood in front of the mirror in her studio, adjusting her neckline, smoothing the deep red fabric of her dress, structured yet soft, like herself. She pinned a single pink camellia just above her heart. No perfume. No armor. She arrived at Barrett & Co. just before 8:30. The receptionist looked startled, but didn't stop her. The elevator was waiting. When the doors opened onto the 56th floor, she stepped into a different kind of battlefield. Glass walls. Cold light. 12 members seated at the long table, including Richard Barrett, in a steel-gray suit, fingers steepled, expression predatory. And at the far end, Cole, not in his usual uniform. Today, he wore no tie. The first 2 buttons of his shirt were undone. There was something vulnerable in the set of his shoulders. Even as his expression remained unreadable, he didn't nod, didn't smile, just gestured to the head of the table. Miss Rivera, you have the floor. April stepped into the center of the room. No notes. No slides. Just breath and bone and heart. I'm not here as a contractor, she began. I'm here as someone who was given the rare opportunity to humanize a corporation that had forgotten its humanity. Silence. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single bloom, a coral peony, the last one from her secret rooftop garden. This flower survived mold, wind, and being crushed beneath snow. It still bloomed. She looked directly at Richard. You tried to sterilize a company that was finally learning how to feel. You think emotion is weakness. But let me remind you what you call indulgence. The world calls loyalty. What you call sentiment, your employees call belonging. A board member shifted uncomfortably. Another folded their hands. April placed the flower on the table. Your son gave this place breath. I gave it shape. And the people inside these walls gave it meaning. You can't unbuild that with silence. She turned to leave, but posed. Faced Cole. Not everything fragile is disposable. Their eyes locked. He stood, motioned to retain Miss Rivera as artistic design consultant, he said evenly, and to launch a wellness initiative tied to employee creative input. Full transparency. Budget pre-approved. Silence. Then a voice. Seconded. Another. I. Richard didn't speak, but he did stand and walk out. The vote passed 8-3. Later, in the now silent boardroom, Cole approached her. He didn't smile, but he looked relieved. Weathered. Human. You didn't have to come. I did. You could have hated me. I did. He nodded once, slowly. Then, after a long pause, I never stopped seeing you. April looked down at the flower still resting on the table. I know, she said. You just forgot how to stand with me. A beat. Are you ready now? His voice was soft. Fragile. Yes, she said. But this time, don't make me bloom alone. Chapter 8. Coop in Bloom. Cole stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his corner office, staring down at the glittering chaos of the Manhattan skyline. From up here, everything looked calm, elegant, controlled. But inside these walls, war had begun. April's voice still echoed in the marrow of his bones. Not everything fragile is disposable. She had walked into that boardroom like a storm disguised as a woman, and for 5 excruciating minutes, she had cracked open a silence that had ruled his life for decades. Now, it was his turn. Downstairs, April paced the hallway outside the strategy suite, heart pounding. The new wellness initiative proposal was on the table. Cole had insisted she co-present it. But more than that, it was her design, her research, her labor stitched together over 6 sleepless nights. The idea: create micro-bloom zones across Barrett & Co. sanctuaries of calm and creativity designed in collaboration with employees. Not for them. Flowers would be language. Each space would be a living metaphor for the people who worked there. It wasn't just design. It was rebellion. "Don't forget to breathe," a voice murmured. April turned to see Evelyn approaching, a folder clutched in her arms. "Richard is trying to undercut you with a counterproposal. Wants to replace your initiative with a sterile sensory control program. Synthetic plants. Mood lighting. No employee input." April let out a slow exhale. "Of course he does. He's framing yours as a liability." April squared her shoulders. "Then I'll make it a legacy instead." Inside the boardroom, Richard Barrett's voice slithered through the air like smoke. "Mr. Barrett," he said, addressing Cole from across the table, "has consistently overstepped his role as CEO by introducing personal entanglements into company culture. Miss Rivera's floral displays, while aesthetically appreciated, represent a misuse of company funds and a distraction from our strategic goals." Cole didn't flinch, but April felt the tension in the room tighten like a snare. She stood. "Flowers are not distractions," she said clearly. "They're declarations. And if you think softness is weakness, Mr. Barrett, then maybe you've been the distraction all along." "Ohush fell." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" April took a step forward. "You paved over your wife's garden the day she died," she said, "because beauty scared you, because grief required vulnerability, and you raised a son to fear softness the way you feared your own humanity." Cole inhaled sharply but didn't stop her. "I revived her grave," April continued, "not because of pity, but because that's where the story started, and I won't let it end with silence." Board members shifted in their seats. Evelyn watched with wide eyes. April reached into her bag and pulled out a small glass box. Inside, a single white camellia, preserved and still luminous. "This was found beneath the lemon tree in the rooftop garden," she said. "A space your company forgot it even owned. We revived it. Together. And in doing so, we revived a building, a workforce, a sense of belonging." She set the box on the table. "This isn't just aesthetics. It's architecture for emotional truth." Then, turning to the room, "If this company can't survive the presence of real feeling, then maybe the rot isn't coming from the roots, it's coming from the top." A full minute passed. Then another. Cole finally stood. His voice, when it came, was quiet. Steel wrapped in velvet. "I second the proposal for Wild Revision's integration initiative. Employee-led. Transparent. Permanent." One by one, board members nodded. Some quickly, others hesitantly, all except Richard. He stood, slowly, face ashen. "This is a mistake." "No," Cole said, calm and final. "The mistake was letting you define strength as control." Richard stared at his son, and for the first time, he looked small. Not powerful, not dangerous. Just a man who had mistaken silence for order his whole life. He left without another word. When the doors closed, April turned to Cole. She expected applause, relief, a handshake, maybe. Instead, he crossed the room and touched her hand. "Come with me." He led her to the rooftop. The lemon tree stood tall, leafy and green, tiny buds forming on its limbs. Cole reached into his jacket, pulled out a gold skeleton key, held it between them. "I bought back your old flower shop this morning," he said. "Wild Revisions. It's yours again. No strings. No contracts." April's breath caught. "Why?" He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Because some people bloom with you. Others bloom because of you. Then, softer. And I'm ready to stop being afraid of both." April stared at the key. It gleamed in his hand like something ancient, like a symbol from a fairy tale, where redemption didn't come from slaying dragons, but from planting something after the smoke cleared. "You bought my shop," she whispered. "I gave it back to you," Cole corrected gently. "It was always yours. I just removed the locks." Emotion surged up her throat, like sunlight through cracks in pavement. She looked down at the key, Then up at him this man who had spent his life mastering the art of stillness, now finally learning to reach. "I didn't ask you to save me," she said. His voice was quiet. "I know. You were already saving yourself. I just wanted to stop standing in the way." A breeze moved between them. A lemon blossom fell, landing delicately between their feet. "Cole," she asked, heart beating faster, "what now?" He didn't hesitate. "We rebuild." She blinked. Rebuild what? He looked around at the rooftop garden they had both healed, at the skyline pulsing around them, then finally at her. "Myself," he said. "My company. My mother's memory." His hand brushed hers. "And if you'll let me us." They walked together along the narrow stone path April had installed weeks ago, stepping stones surrounded by wild clover and lavender, now grown into a fragrant patchwork. The garden was no longer tidy. It was alive. Like them. She paused at the camellia bush she'd secretly planted in a half-broken pot. Cole followed her gaze. "That's hers, isn't it?" April nodded. "I didn't know how to say goodbye," he admitted. "You don't have to," she whispered. "You're building something new with her still inside it." He turned to her. "And with you." April didn't speak. She just kissed him. Soft. Certain. Not like a fairy tale. Like forgiveness. The next day, Barrett & Co. Headquarters bloomed. Not with roses or showy arrangements, but with curated chaos. Ivy twisting through handrails, micro-arrangements created by employees in glass jars, poetry snippets attached to bouquet stems. An entire corner of the lobby transformed into a collaborative growth wall where staff placed flowers for milestones, birthdays, heartbreaks, wins. And in the center, a single camellia, untouched. No label. Everyone knew what it meant. April's Brooklyn studio reopened that weekend. Not just a shop this time, a space. For memory, for creation, for community. Cole came to the opening in jeans and no security detail, hands dusty from planting morning glory vines outside. He stayed all day. No fanfare, just presence. That night, she found a note under her cash register, his handwriting again. This time not sharp or controlled. Looser. Honest. "I used to think silence protected me, but it just kept me from hearing what mattered. You were always the garden. I was just learning how to stay." See. And for the first time since she lost her shop, her money, her faith, April let herself believe in something she couldn't control. Love. Wild. Rooted. And finally in bloom. Chapter 9. Petal by petal. 6 weeks later, April woke to the smell of basil and citrus. She blinked against the golden morning light pouring through her Brooklyn apartment window, no longer a cramped crash pad above her old shop, but a restored loft filled with florals, sun, and Cole Barrett's discarded suit jacket slung over her reading chair like a flag of surrender. She sat up, heart warm before thought even formed. Footsteps pattered in from the kitchen. Cole appeared, barefoot, sleeves rolled, hair tousled, holding a steaming mug. "For the lady who still argues with me about the proper way to prune camellias," he said, offering it. She smiled sleepily. "And yet you keep inviting the debate." He smirked. "I like your convictions. And your coffee." He sat beside her, close enough to tangle limbs if either of them shifted. His presence still held the weight of silence, but not the emptiness it once did. Now it was grounding. A quiet "I'm here." They drank in peace. The kind of peace built one small act at a time. Later that day, April found herself in the reopened Wild Revisions, now housed in its original location but transformed into a living studio shop hybrid. Sketches covered the walls. A new greenhouse dome was under construction out back. Employee submissions were pinned to a corkboard beside a sign that read, "What did you survive this week?" She didn't call it therapy. But people came anyway. They left with flowers. They stayed for belonging. Today, Cole wandered through the space in rolled-up sleeves, adjusting a string of dried lavender and tangerine rinds hanging in the front window. "You don't need to micromanage the garlands," April teased from behind the workbench. "I'm participating," he said, deadpan. "This is employee engagement." You're not on payroll. Neither are you. Technically. She grinned. Then, her expression softened. You really are staying, aren't you? He met her eyes. I left a tower for a greenhouse. She stepped toward him. And? I do it again. He took her hand. There was still so much they hadn't said. Still scars to trace. Wounds that bloomed in the dark, but what they had now was not made of glass. It was soil, and roots, and long, slow growing. That evening, Cole took her to Prospect Park with a picnic basket and no bodyguards. They sat on a patch of grass just off the gravel path where couples passed by walking dogs, children rolled by on scooters, and the world kept spinning. He handed her a folded napkin. Inside, a pressed camellia. Pink. Preserved. Still radiant. April laughed softly. You saved it? He shrugged. I'm not great at emotions, but I'm excellent at logistics. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held it. I never thought we'd circle back to this. We didn't, he said. She looked up, confused. We're not circling back. We're planting forward. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a ring box. April froze. Don't panic, Cole said quietly, eyes never leaving hers. There's no crowd. No press. No drone filming us from above. She blinked, heart tripping over itself. I just wanted to give you something permanent. Not because I saved you, but because you saved me. He opened the box. Inside, a delicate gold ring, shaped like a vine wrapped in a crescent moon. In the center, not a diamond. A single carved camellia. White. Pure. I want to build something wild and rooted, he said. With you. Petal by petal. April didn't cry. She bloomed. Yes, she whispered. And for once, silence wasn't armor. It was home. That night, Brooklyn hummed around them low jazz from an open window, the rhythmic bark of a dog 2 buildings over, the hush of traffic like ocean waves in the distance. April lay with her head on Cole's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, his breath brushing through her curls. His arms held her like he finally believed she wouldn't vanish. Not like his mother. Not like trust. I've never worn a ring before, she murmured, turning her hand to let the camellia-shaped band catch the street lamp's gold light. Cole tilted his head. I've never given one. She laughed quietly. Liard, you've probably gifted a dozen rings by now. Not like this. He said it so simply, so steadily, that her smile faded not from sadness, but reverence. She looked up. Why the moon? He brushed a thumb along her collarbone. Because you pulled the tide back in. The next morning, the proposal photo taken in secret by an elderly woman walking her dog appeared on Instagram. April didn't post it. Neither did Cole. But it went viral anyway. Not for the ring. Not for the billionaire. For the caption, the stranger wrote beneath it. Saw 2 people in the park last night. She wore no makeup. He had holes in his socks. But I've never seen 2 people look more like a vow. April stared at the image, stunned. Cole in his rumpled coat, kneeling. Her eyes closed, smiling like she could taste the future. She turned the screen toward him. He just looked at it and said, My socks weren't that bad. She snorted. They were. They didn't issue a press release. They didn't monetize the moment. They didn't need to. Back at Wild Revisions, the camellia became an emblem. Clients asked for it in tattoos, in dried wedding wreaths, in pinned corsages for divorce parties and survivor galas. April never sold them in bundles. Only as singles. Just one, she'd say, because love worth keeping doesn't need to be loud. Cole installed a small brass plaque in the back greenhouse. It read, Petal by petal, we grow toward the light. A. R. and C. B. At Barrett Co., the legacy shifted. Gone were the cold orchids and soulless minimalist displays. In their place, curated displays from employees. A rotating grief garden for quiet losses. A joy shelf lined with thank you stems from co-workers. Even Richard Barrett, now retired and stewing in a Connecticut mansion, had to admit stock value was up. But more importantly, The people inside those glass walls finally breathed, because someone dared to plant something fragile, and someone else dared to let it stay. One night, weeks later, Cole stood in the middle of the rooftop garden, now fully restored. The lemon tree bloomed quietly behind him. Stars blinked a bow. April came up beside him, barefoot, fingers still stained from ink and iris dust. He turned to her. "This," he said softly, "is the first place I ever let myself want you." She didn't answer. She kissed him instead. And from somewhere behind them, a camellia fell from its branch and landed on the stone path without breaking. Chapter 10. The Proposal Garden. The shop was closed for the day, but the windows still glowed. Late September sunlight poured through the glass like warm syrup, stretching shadows across the pale wood floor of Wild Revisions. The walls were dressed with garlands of dried citrus, silver-dollar eucalyptus, and golden yarrow. Vines curled lazily along the ceiling beams. A soft wind rustled through the open back door, carrying the faint scent of lavender and pine from the courtyard beyond. April stood in the center of it all, barefoot, a simple white linen dress fluttering against her ankles, her curls pinned loosely with a single blush-pink camellia behind her ear. This wasn't a wedding. Not exactly. But it was something sacred. Cole stood just outside the threshold, watching her. He wore no tie, no designer watch, no curated facade, just soft navy slacks, rolled sleeves, and the look of a man who had spent months unlearning control and learning presence instead. His hand rested against the frame of the door like he was anchoring himself to something real. When April turned, he didn't speak. He just stepped inside the garden-scented quiet, letting it swallow them both. She smiled. "You're late." He looked around at the handmade altar, a table covered in wildflowers, pebbles from their first hike, pressed petals from the first bouquet she ever gave him, and a white ceramic watering bell tucked among it all. "I didn't want to rush it," he said. April stepped toward him, the dried leaves crunching faintly underfoot. "You planning to make a speech?" "No." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of cardstock. "But I wrote one anyway." "Of course you did," she murmured. Taking his hand, he didn't read it. Instead, he let it drop to the floor like an old fear he no longer needed. "I have nothing polished to say," he began. "But I have this." He gently turned her hand over, tracing the inside of her wrist with a finger. "You are the first thing I didn't try to control. The first space where silence didn't feel like punishment." He inhaled, eyes steady on hers. "I used to believe love was something earned by order. But with you, it came wild, messy, beautiful, like a bloom I never planted but needed." April blinked quickly. Her throat ached. "I don't want a vow in a tower," he said. "I want a life in a garden. One where we keep planting, even when storms come, even when petals fall." He reached into his other pocket. This time, not a ring box, but a seed. A tiny lemon seed. April's breath hitched. "We plant this," he whispered, "and let it grow beside us. Slowly, quietly, as proof." She didn't speak. She just held out her hand, and he placed the seed in her palm like he was placing his whole soul there too. They walked into the back courtyard, where an empty pot sat waiting beneath a trellis of climbing jasmine. Together, they pressed the seed into soil. No audience, no signatures, just skin against dirt, and hearts soft enough to bloom. Inside, the shop stayed quiet. Only the late light remained honey-colored, slow, warm. It caught the corners of everything they'd built. Sketches pinned above the workbench, dried roses in jars, the gold skeleton key now framed behind glass. And on the windowsill, a single fresh camellia, glowing like it had always been meant to be here. Later that night, after the last lantern flickered out and the courtyard went still, April sat curled on the couch in the back corner of the shop, her bare feet tucked beneath her and Cole's head resting in her lap. She traced her fingers through his hair, slow and quiet, the kind of touch you reserve for someone who has finally stopped running. Outside, the lemon seed sat nestled in its soil, a beginning too small to notice, but they had both planted it. Together. "I keep waiting for it to feel different," April whispered. Cole's voice was barely audible. "What?" "This. Us. Something this good usually comes with a catch. He shifted to look up at her, his face lit by the golden glow of the shop's single pendant bulb. "There is a catch." She smiled faintly. "Of course there is. You have to keep choosing me. Even when I forget how to be soft. Even when I slip into silence again." She nodded. "Only if you keep letting me remind you." "I will," he said, petal by petal. In the days that followed, the seed didn't sprout. Not right away. It sat there in its clay pot, plain and unimpressive, while the rest of the world bloomed and buzzed around it. April watered it, spoke to it, left a tiny glass charm hanging above it, a charm Cole bought from a street vendor on a whim, shaped like a droplet of rain. Every morning, she checked the soil, and every morning she whispered, "We're still here." Cole never asked if it had grown yet. He just brushed his hand against the pot as he passed it, like a promise he was keeping. They lived their life like that. Small gestures. Quiet mornings. Late dinners eaten cross-legged on the floor of the flower shop, laughing about ruined arrangements and the way Cole still couldn't tell the difference between an anemone and a ranunculus. 3 months later, a tiny green sprout broke through the soil. April screamed. Cole dropped his coffee. They danced barefoot in the greenhouse, holding each other like something sacred had returned. They named the seedling Grace. That winter, snow dusted the city in white silence. Barrett released its first sustainability report under a new initiative, Rooted Innovation, employee-led, artistically driven, built from the very philosophy April had seeded. The building was no longer just a headquarters, it was an ecosystem, a living, breathing thing. Cole stepped down as CEO, appointed a woman from finance. Brilliant, empathetic, quietly radical, and he moved to Brooklyn full-time. People whispered, "Of course." He didn't care. April caught him one morning, sketching a design for a rooftop greenhouse annex. He looked sheepish. She kissed him. The night before their civil ceremony, Cole stood in the back room of the flower shop, adjusting a hand-tied bouquet in the mirror. No toques, just navy linen and bare feet. April stepped in, wearing a silk robe, her hair curled around her shoulders like ivy. He turned, lips parting. "No veil?" he asked. She walked up to him and laced their fingers. "I want you to see me clearly." He nodded. "I always do now." They didn't rehearse vows, didn't need them. That evening, in front of 30 friends, a lemon tree, and a handful of wild petals tossed by laughing co-workers, they said only 2 things. Cole, "I will stay." April, "So will I." Years from now, they'll tell the story differently. People will say a billionaire fell for a florist, that he saved her, that she changed him, but they'll be wrong, because the truth was quieter. The truth was this: they found each other in a room full of silence and built a garden inside it. Petal by petal, root by root, love that stayed and bloomed forever.